Did you really think a guy like you could lead this project? You're nothing but a glorified errand boy. Ryan Mercer's voice cut through the conference room like a blade, loud enough for the laughter to ripple among the executives, and I felt my chest hollow out as the eyes turned toward me, including the one pair I wished above all others hadn't been here. My wife Emily, who had rearranged her entire morning to come watch me present, the one person whose pride mattered more to me than the damn promotion itself. And in that moment, with her biting her lip to hide confusion, maybe even shame, I could taste humiliation burn the back of my throat like acid. My name is Daniel Hayes. I'm 44 years old from Dayton, Ohio, and while they may think I'm cornered, they have no idea that the document tucked neatly in my briefcase, the one I've been updating for weeks with a clause no one else bothered to read, will be the fuse that sets everything in this room on fire when the time is right. Though I can't show my hand yet, not with Ryan smirking like a wolf that's already tasted blood, and the executives chuckling politely, and Emily shrinking into her chair as if she wished she hadn't come. My fingers tightened around the smooth wood of the pointer I had set down moments earlier. The slides behind me frozen mid-transition, graphs of market expansion and efficiency ratios reduced to meaningless lines of light now overshadowed by Ryan's smug insult, and the room's air felt heavier than the steel beams that held this downtown building upright, a cage pressing against my ribs, every second stretching like taut wire ready to snap. But I forced myself to breathe, because survival in moments like this wasn't about shouting back or proving them wrong on the spot. It was about remembering every detail, every laugh, every dismissive shake of a head, because humiliation this sharp doesn't fade. It carves, and once carved, it demands repayment. Ryan leaned back in his chair, tie loosened like he'd just claimed victory at a poker table, and said, "Maybe stick to ordering the coffee and booking flights, Danny boy," which landed like a punchline and drew a couple more laughs from the younger associates. And though I wanted to break his nose with the blunt edge of the remote in my palm, I knew the smarter move was silence. Because silence can terrify when it comes from someone who has more patience than pride in the moment. And while my silence tasted bitter now, it would one day taste like victory. Emily's eyes found mine for a second, searching, asking silently why I wasn't fighting back. And I swallowed the ache that rose in my throat, telling myself she would understand later, though the way her fingers clenched the strap of her purse told me she doubted me now, and nothing kills a man faster than doubt from the one person he's built his life around. Still, I turned back toward the slides, forced my voice steady, forced the words out, and finished the presentation like my career depended on it, though the laughter lingered like cigarette smoke in a cheap motel room, long after the joke has ended. When the meeting broke, Ryan clapped me on the back with faux camaraderie, a gesture meant to salt the wound, and whispered, "You'll never sit in the big chair, Hayes," before striding out with his tailored suit catching the light, leaving me to gather my papers while Emily avoided my gaze. The silence between us louder than any insult, and in that silence I thought of my father. How he used to peel an apple every night with his old pocket knife, slicing the skin in one continuous ribbon, saying, "A man's patience is tested by how steady his hand is when others try to shake it." A phrase I never fully understood until this morning, because in Ryan's arrogance, he'd just given me the skin of the apple, and I was holding the knife. I slipped the untouched apple I'd packed from home, part of a nervous ritual I'd carried into every big meeting, back into my briefcase beside the contract draft. And it struck me then that this apple, simple and ordinary, had to be my anchor, a symbol I'd carry forward, because when the time came, it would not just be an apple anymore, it would be the reminder of humiliation, the emblem of everything Ryan thought he'd gotten away with, and it would return to him in a way he could never anticipate. Emily walked a step ahead of me toward the elevator, heels clicking sharp against the marble, and the silence between us pressed harder with each floor we descended, her reflection in the mirrored wall refusing to meet my eyes. And when we reached the lobby, she finally muttered, "I don't know why you let him say that," words so soft yet sharper than Ryan's, because coming from her, they cut through every layer of armor I had. And all I could say was, "Because he doesn't know what I know," though even as I said it, I could see she wasn't convinced. Before we get deeper into this story, make sure you're subscribed, and tell us in the comments where in the world you're listening from. She left without kissing me goodbye, her shoulders stiff, her figure shrinking into the city crowd, and I stood under the cold blast of the revolving doors, my breath fogging as the chill bit into me, replaying Ryan's words on a loop, and something inside me hardened. because the only thing worse than public humiliation is being stripped of the respect of the person you love. And I realized I couldn't just wait for justice to unfold naturally. I had to build it, brick by brick, and that thought set my pulse hammering as I imagined the precise ways I could unravel Ryan Mercer, without him realizing the floor beneath him was cracking. And when my phone buzzed with an email notification from the HR director, confirming that Ryan had temporarily assumed leadership of the project I'd spent 2 years constructing, a wave of rage surged through me so strong I nearly crushed the phone in my hand, but instead I hit save on the email, screenshotting it instantly. Because rage burns out but evidence endures. And if Ryan thought today was the end of my climb, he was blind to the fact that it was the beginning of his fall. And as I walked toward the parking garage, briefcase heavy with contracts and an apple rolling gently inside, I knew I would not only fight for my career, but for the piece of myself Ryan tried to strip away, and no matter how long it took, I would carve the apple clean. The fluorescent buzz of the parking garage pressed against my skull as I slid into the driver's seat, the briefcase balanced on the passenger side like a passenger itself, the apple within shifting softly with each turn of the wheel, as if reminding me it was there, a red witness to the vow I'd made above. And while traffic swallowed me whole on the way home, horns blaring and brake lights glowing like angry embers, my mind burned hotter, replaying Emily's silence, Ryan's laughter, the smug certainty in his whisper, and though I tightened my grip on the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened, I forced myself not to scream, because anger vented too early is like gasoline lit without direction. It scorches the wrong things. I needed precision, I needed patience. And so when I pulled into my driveway, the suburban calm mocking me with kids' bikes in yards and the distant bark of a neighbor's dog, I sat there for a long time in the car, staring at the glow of my phone screen where the screenshot of HR's email gleamed like a loaded chamber, and I told myself that I had ammunition. I just needed the right battlefield. Inside, Emily had left a note on the kitchen counter, short, cold, and written in that rushed, slanted script she only used when she wanted distance. Dinner's in the fridge. I'm staying with my sister tonight, don't wait up. And though I wanted to crumple it, scream, chase after her, I instead placed it under the apple I pulled from my briefcase, letting the weight of fruit pin down the paper as if anchoring me to reality, reminding me that Ryan hadn't just humiliated me in a boardroom, he'd cracked something fragile at home too, and cracks spread if not sealed. I microwaved the lasagna. Though the taste was ash, scrolled through work emails, noting each line Ryan had sent the executive team about streamlining project leadership and taking immediate ownership, each sentence carefully stripped of my name, and bile rose in my throat as I realized how methodical he was at erasing me. But I also noticed something, a small timestamp inconsistency in one of his forwarded chains. A line buried deep where he'd copied figures from a draft I hadn't finalized yet, meaning he'd jumped the gun, claimed numbers that weren't ready, and that detail, insignificant to anyone else, was my first thread to pull, though pulling it too soon would only tip him off, so I filed it away, screenshotting everything, saving every attachment, labeling each folder with dates and keywords like a prosecutor building a case. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't comfort but accuses, and in that silence, I poured myself a bourbon, sat at the dining table, and whispered to no one. He took my work, he took my pride, and if I let him, he'll take my family too. And for the first time in years, I cried not loud, not messy, just steady tears sliding down while I drank, and I hated myself for it. But I also knew there was no shame in bleeding in private as long as the world only ever saw the scars. Pain can be fuel if you don't let it rot you. The next morning, I showed up to the office early, the halls still echoing with janitors' vacuums, and I sat at my desk scrolling through internal messages when I found it, Ryan in a private chat with Melissa, one of the junior analysts, laughing about Danny Boy's meltdown, and joking that I'd probably blame my wife leaving on the company too. And though it made my stomach twist to see my personal life reduced to punchlines, I also realized something more dangerous. Ryan was careless, arrogant, leaving a trail of digital crumbs, and people like him never imagine anyone will follow the trail because they think they're untouchable. But I knew then that if I just kept watching, documenting, waiting, his own words would be the rope he hung himself with. Around noon, Emily texted me, not to apologize, but to say she needed space to think. And that phrase cut deeper than Ryan's jokes because it meant she doubted my strength, my ability to fight back, and maybe even my worth. And though my chest tightened, I forced myself to reply, "Take your time, I'll be here." because clinging only drives people further away. And I needed her to see the man who would rise again, not the one kicked down. Ryan strutted into the office around 11, late as always, dropping his leather bag on his desk like he owned the place. And when he passed by me, he smirked, murmuring, "Still showing up, hmm? Guess I underestimated your tolerance for humiliation." Words that would have gutted me yesterday, but today I cataloged them instead, storing them alongside the screenshots, because the more he underestimated me, the deeper he dug his own grave. That night, unable to sleep, I opened the folder of evidence I'd built, staring at the dozens of screenshots, emails, notes, all of them forming a web with Ryan at the center, and I realized this wasn't just about getting my project back or even the promotion. It was about reclaiming the dignity he'd stripped from me in front of Emily, the executives, everyone, and in that clarity, I remembered my father's other line, one he muttered once after a neighbor tried to cheat him out of a deal. "Sometimes you don't need to raise your voice, you just need to raise the right receipt." And it hit me then that the timestamp inconsistency in Ryan's email wasn't just a thread, it was a receipt, a technicality, a crack in the foundation that could bring the whole house down. If only I pulled it at the right moment. Days blurred into a routine of quiet observation and strategic patience, Ryan growing bolder, taking more credit, mocking me more openly in meetings while others laughed uneasily. And each time I let it slide, storing the fuel, because the fire had to be controlled. And yet at night when Emily's side of the bed remained cold, doubt gnawed at me, whispering that maybe revenge wouldn't fix what was breaking at home. But then I'd open the folder, see Ryan's arrogance documented line by line, and the doubt hardened into resolve again, because if I didn't fight back, then maybe Emily was right to doubt me. On the 5th day, my phone buzzed with a notification, an anonymous message from an internal number with a screenshot attached. One I hadn't taken, showing Ryan mocking me in a group chat with several managers, adding a laughing emoji next to a meme of a donkey labeled Danny Boy. And though the humiliation should have crushed me, instead I smiled for the first time all week. Because it meant someone else inside had seen enough of Ryan too. Someone was leaking me his sins, and allies in the shadows are worth more than applause in the open. As I lay awake that night, the apple I'd left on the counter growing softer with age, I rolled it in my palm and whispered to myself, "Rot doesn't disappear. It spreads until it consumes the hand that feeds it." And in that thought I found strength, because Ryan's rot was spreading and I just had to make sure it reached the right eyes at the right time before I pressed send. By the 7th day, I no longer flinched when Ryan's laughter echoed across the office floor. Instead, I let it ETCH itself deeper into me like grooves on a record, because grooves play back when the needle drops, and I was close to dropping mine, closer than he could imagine. The evidence folder now swollen with emails, screenshots, and even 2 voice recordings I'd captured on my phone when he bragged loudly in the break room about cleaning house and getting rid of dead weight. And though the others chuckled along nervously, I caught the flickers of unease in their eyes, proof that his arrogance was beginning to alienate even those who once laughed with him. And I thought to myself, arrogance is the enemy's loudest drumbeat. It drowns out the whispers of betrayal until it's too late to stop the march. Still, what I needed was not just evidence but spectacle, a moment so undeniable that the entire company would see him fall. And I knew the perfect stage was coming. The quarterly shareholder meeting, scheduled for Friday, where Ryan was slated to present his project strategy to the board and investors, a meeting that would be streamed live to employees across the country, and while he expected to bask in the spotlight, I was already threading the wires under the stage. Emily hadn't returned home yet, though she texted occasionally short updates, neutral in tone, the kind that felt more like obligation than affection, and I carried her absence like a stone in my chest, telling myself over and over that the only way to bring her back was to stand again. Not as a man bowed by humiliation, but as one who turned humiliation into a weapon. And so each night I refined my plan, reviewing the contract clause I'd hidden weeks ago, the clause about project stewardship rights that transferred ownership back to the original lead if leadership had been assumed under false pretenses or misrepresented contributions, a clause Ryan hadn't noticed, a clause signed by every executive as part of the compliance addendum, buried in the fine print like a landmine waiting for his footstep. And the beauty of it was that Ryan himself had triggered it the moment he forwarded my unfinished draft as proof of his progress. The anonymous leaks continued more screenshots of Ryan's crude jokes, one recording where he mocked the CEO's age, Even a photo of him drunk at a bar with his tie wrapped around his head, middle finger raised to the camera, and though part of me wondered who was feeding me this, I didn't question it too hard because lies are not always friends. Sometimes they're just people who hate the same enemy, and in war that's enough. On Thursday night, I sat in the dark kitchen with the apple in my hand, its skin now wrinkled, its weight lighter than before, and I stared at it until dawn, whispering to myself, "Rot doesn't vanish. It becomes proof." And I knew then I'd carry it into the meeting like a talisman, not to eat but to show, a symbol of patience turned to poison. The day of the shareholder meeting, the office buzzed like a hive, Ryan strutting in early for once, rehearsing his lines, snapping at interns to adjust the slides, and when he brushed past me with his usual smirk and whispered, "Try not to cry on camera, Hayes," I only smiled back, a smile so calm it unsettled him for a fraction of a second, though he quickly masked it with his swagger. But I saw the first crack of doubt in his confidence, and cracks spread faster than men realize. The boardroom was packed, cameras set, investors seated in crisp suits, executives aligned like chess pieces, and Ryan took the podium with a showman's grin, launching into the strategy I had built, charts glowing behind him, his voice slick with false authority. And though my pulse hammered, I sat silently at the side, briefcase on my lap, every second drawing me closer to the strike. Halfway through his presentation, he stumbled just slightly on one of the metrics, the one he'd stolen from my unfinished draft, and I saw the CFO's brow furrow, noting the discrepancy, and that was my cue. I opened the briefcase, slid out the contract folder, and placed the apple on top, its shriveled skin a quiet punctuation mark, and when Ryan finished with a flourish, inviting applause, I rose slowly, the sound of my chair scraping against the floor, silencing the room more effectively than any gavel. And I said, "Before we continue, I think the board should see the original draft of this project. The one submitted under my stewardship," my voice steady, almost calm, though inside my veins blazed like fire. Ryan's smile faltered, his eyes darting, and I caught the flicker of panic before he forced a laugh, saying, "Danny boy, don't embarrass yourself." But I had already handed the folder to the assistant who carried it to the CEO, who adjusted his glasses and began reading aloud the clause Ryan had overlooked, his voice grave as he said, "If project leadership has been assumed under misrepresentation, stewardship rights revert to the original lead." And the room shifted, murmurs rising like a tide, cameras capturing every second, and I locked eyes with Ryan, watching the blood drain from his face as he realized he'd just detonated his own bomb. Still, I wasn't finished, because justice without exposure is just paperwork. I took out my phone, mirrored it to the screen, and displayed the screenshots. Ryan mocking me, mocking the CEO, mocking the company, each image appearing larger than life, each word undeniable, and the room gasped, investors exchanging sharp looks, executives shifting uncomfortably, the CEO's jaw tightening as his legacy had been dragged through Ryan's careless arrogance. And in that moment, Ryan's downfall was no longer a possibility, it was a certainty. He stammered, tried to defend himself, saying the messages were jokes, taken out of context, but then the anonymous recording I'd been sent. His drunken rant about the CEO being Erlich and the project being his ticket to the big chair played across the speakers, his slurred voice echoing like a death knell. And I felt something almost like pity for him as he wilted at the podium, sweat streaking his temple. The board staring daggers, the investors scribbling furious notes because I knew the man he thought he was had just been stripped bare before the entire company. Still, pity is wasted on those who carve humiliation into others, so I reached into my pocket, lifted the shriveled apple, and set it on the podium beside him, saying nothing, just letting it sit there as cameras flashed, the symbol of rot now undeniably tied to his name, and the silence that followed was heavier than applause, heavier than anything I'd ever felt. Because it was the silence of a man destroyed by his own arrogance, and though the CEO began to speak, outlining immediate termination proceedings and contractual violations, my focus was on Ryan's eyes wide, hollow, and burning with the realization that he'd been undone, not by a rival's strength, but by his own carelessness. And that was the purest revenge of all. The boardroom dissolved into chaos, voices overlapping, investors demanding explanations, the CEO pounding the table for order while Ryan stood paralyzed at the podium, the shriveled apple beside him like a rotting crown, and though part of me wanted to savor the moment in silence, I knew spectacle alone wasn't enough. Justice had to be sealed. Permanent, undeniable, so when the CEO ordered security to escort Ryan out, I raised my hand calmly and said, "With respect, there's more the board needs to see before you decide his fate." And the room froze, every eye snapping back to me, Ryan's wild with desperation because he sensed what I was about to do, but couldn't stop it. Not now, not when the ground was already collapsing beneath him. I mirrored my phone screen again, this time pulling up a folder I hadn't shared before. The one containing the internal documents where Ryan had altered dates, fudged projections, and inserted his name where mine once was. And then I layered on top the timestamp inconsistencies I'd caught. Proof that he'd claimed figures from drafts that weren't final. Proof that he'd misled investors with numbers that never existed. And as the murmurs sharpened into gasps, I saw the investors' faces harden into something colder betrayal. The one thing moneyed men never forgive, because numbers are sacred to them, and Ryan had spat on them with his arrogance. He lunged toward me then, trying to snatch the phone, shouting, "This is bullshit! He's lying!" But security caught him mid-stride, twisting his arms behind his back, and though I thought that was the end of it, the CEO leaned forward, voice low but trembling with rage, and said, "Mr. Mercer, your contract explicitly forbids falsification of data or misrepresentation to stakeholders, punishable by immediate termination and forfeiture of all severance benefits." And as the words sank in, I saw Ryan's body sag, the fight draining out of him, his entire career stripped not just by disgrace but by a technicality he had never read, the very fine print I had spent weeks weaving like a noose. And yet, even as security dragged him toward the door, he spat over his shoulder at me, voice cracking, "You think you've won, Hayes? You're still nothing without me." And those words might have landed once, might have cut deep, but not now, not after I had watched his empire crumble under the weight of his own rot. And so I rose slowly, meeting his gaze, and said, "The difference between us, Ryan, is that I don't need to burn others to shine." And though it wasn't witty, it was real, and sometimes reality cuts sharper than any insult. The cameras captured everything, the apple, the claws, the receipts, his outburst, and by evening, clips of the shareholder meeting were already trending online, the hashtags multiplying, memes circulating of Ryan with apples rotting over his head, the donkey meme replaced with his own face. And though I didn't post a thing, I didn't have to. The digital world carried the revenge further than I ever could, dragging his name through every feed, every inbox, every whisper in every bar. And I thought to myself, humiliation is like wildfire. Once it escapes, no man can control where it spreads. Still, the victory felt hollow when I got home to an empty house, the apple from the meeting still in my briefcase, its rot seeping into the leather, and Emily's absence louder than any applause. So I poured another bourbon, stared at the dark kitchen, and wondered if I had won only half the battle, because what good is reclaiming pride at work if the person you love no longer believes in you? Days later, Emily finally returned, standing in the doorway with her overnight bag, eyes scanning me like I was a stranger, and she said, "I saw the video. Everyone's talking about it." Her voice unreadable, and I braced myself for her judgment. But instead she whispered, "I didn't think you had it in you." And though part of me bristled at the doubt implied in those words, another part softened. Because I understood what she meant, she needed to see not just that I could endure humiliation, but that I could fight back with something more than silence, and maybe, just maybe, we had a chance to rebuild. But the double twist came days later, when I discovered who had been feeding me the anonymous leaks. Melissa, the junior analyst, who knocked on my office door with a cautious smile and admitted, "I couldn't stand watching him steal everything, so I sent you what I had." And though gratitude swelled in me, so did unease, because allies who act in shadows often expect repayment, and sure enough she leaned in, lowering her voice, and said, "I hope now you'll remember who really helped you when it mattered." A hint of ambition glinting in her eyes. And I realized then that victory is never clean. It just shifts the battlefield. And while Ryan was gone, others would rise, hungry, watching me, testing me, waiting for their chance to push me off the chair I just claimed. That night, alone again, I sat at the table with a fresh apple, peeled it carefully with my father's old pocket knife until the skin came off in one continuous ribbon. Steady hands proving patience was still my ally, and I whispered to myself, humiliation is not the end. It's the proof that you've survived to strike again. And as the ribbon of skin coiled on the plate, I thought of Ryan wherever he was now, jobless, ridiculed, a cautionary tale trending in hashtags, and I felt no pity, only the steady weight of a truth carved into me forever. No man can strip your worth unless you hand him the knife. If this story resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. It helps us share more true stories like this.